"You have no choice, Clara." Her father's voice echoed through the frosted hall as she clutched the ivory letter. The seal of Duke Harrison Blackwood glinting in the pale morning light filtering through the tall windows. Snow swirled violently beyond the estate gates, the chill biting through her thin gloves as she took her first step toward the unknown, every footfall on the cobblestones a thunder in her chest, the weight of duty pressing on her like an invisible chain, and yet her heart thudded with a quiet defiance, for even in fear, she would carry herself with dignity. The carriage awaited, a dark silhouette against the storm-tossed horizon, its lanterns casting flickering golden beams on the glistening snow, and as she mounted, the horse's breath formed ghostly clouds that mingled with the wind, carrying her toward a destiny she neither wanted nor understood. Inside the grand hall of Greycourt Manor, Harrison's silhouette appeared at the top of the sweeping staircase, his broad shoulders rigid, eyes steel gray and unyielding, taking in her trembling figure with a silent command that seemed to draw the air from the room. The shadows of the chandelier dancing across his solemn expression, and Clara's throat tightened as she realized that this stranger, this man she would call husband, was as formidable as the tales whispered through the countryside. Yet beneath that imposing exterior, there was a flicker, a subtle shift as his gaze softened for the briefest instant upon the sight of her tear-streaked face, the candlelight catching the moisture and making it shimmer like tiny fragments of hope. A detail he could not have known would unsettle him. The carriage wheels crunched over the frozen drive, the echo a steady drumbeat matching the rhythm of Clara's anxious pulse, each mile taking her closer to the cavernous hall where destiny awaited. And when the doors opened, the scent of old stone and polished wood enveloped her, the quiet hush of the estate punctuated only by the faint crackle of the hearth. Harrison descended with measured steps, his coat brushing the marble floors, the silence between them thick, laden with unspoken expectation. Clara's hands fidgeted with the folds of her cloak as she stepped forward, each movement deliberate yet hesitant, the air charged with a tension that spoke of power, control, and the first hint of something unnameable stirring between them. He extended a gloved hand. In acknowledgement, the smallest gesture, but it held a weight that pressed upon her chest and made her fingers tremble, and as she took it, their eyes met, and in that instant, time seemed to halt, the storm outside a distant murmur, leaving only the quiet understanding that this union, forced as it was, carried the promise of change, of a bond yet to be tested. And as Clara lifted her gaze from his penetrating stare, a whisper of courage rose within her, a fragile ember ready to catch, knowing that every heartbeat in the shadowed hall could carry them both to a future neither yet dared to imagine. The scene set, the tension taut, the story unfolding, and the audience left poised on the edge of discovery, their curiosity ignited by the slightest quiver of emotion between two souls bound by circumstance, and the unexpected depth behind a stranger's eyes. The grand doors of Harrison Blackwood's estate closed behind Clara with a resonant thud, the chill from the storm outside lingering on her cloak as she followed the butler through the marble-floored hall, her heels echoing softly with each step, the flickering candlelight casting dancing shadows across the towering walls adorned with ancestral portraits whose eyes seemed to follow her every movement. She could feel the weight of the estate, the silent authority it exuded pressing upon her, and the measured cadence of the Duke's footsteps from above marked the rhythm of her mounting anxiety, every breath caught in her chest like a fragile crystal ready to shatter. Harrison appeared in the study doorway, his figure framed by the towering windows that let in the gray light of the waning afternoon, the steel-gray eyes meeting hers with a gaze that both unnerved and captivated, revealing the slightest trace of curiosity that contrasted with his otherwise rigid demeanor. And Clara found herself compelled to straighten her posture, gripping the folds of her cloak as if it were a shield, the warmth of the room and the subtle scent of burning wood from the fireplace enveloping her in an unfamiliar cocoon of safety and tension. He spoke softly, his voice measured, precise, yet carrying an undercurrent of restrained emotion. "Follow me," he commanded, and she obeyed, each step a mixture of trepidation and anticipation, the echo of their movement through the grand corridors, amplifying the silence between them, a silence that carried more weight than any words could convey. They reached a chamber with tall, draped windows, the golden light from the hearth flickering across the walls and illuminating Clara's delicate features, the softness in the shadows highlighting the anxious tremble in her fingers as she lowered her gaze to the floor, and Harrison observed silently, the corners of his mouth imperceptibly tightening, a subtle acknowledgement of her discomfort and the fragile dignity she maintained in the face of overwhelming circumstance. A servant entered to set down a tray of tea, the clinking porcelain punctuating the heavy atmosphere, and Clara hesitated, her hands hovering before reaching for the cup, the Duke's gaze following every motion, quiet yet intense, as though measuring her resolve, the careful attention stirring an unexpected flutter of emotion within her chest, a mixture of nervousness and the faintest hint of hope that perhaps this encounter held more than obligation and cold formality. She lifted her eyes to meet his once more, the dim light catching a single tear at the corner of her lashes, a detail he noticed, the tension in his shoulders easing imperceptibly as he moved to stand closer, yet maintaining the formal distance, the space between them charged with an unspoken understanding, the silent acknowledgement that the world outside could wait while this moment unfolded, allowing both to glimpse the hidden vulnerability and quiet strength within the other. The storm outside raged on, snow battering the windows, yet inside the chamber, time seemed to slow, each breath drawn deliberate, every heartbeat a marker of anticipation, and Clara realized that the vast, imposing estate and the formidable man before her were not just barriers, but stages upon which the fragile beginnings of trust and connection could be cautiously explored, leaving the promise of a deepening bond hanging like a candle flicker in the winter dusk, fragile, yet unwavering, beckoning toward an unfolding story that neither of them could yet fully comprehend. Clara followed the Duke through the dimly lit corridors, the soft glow of wall sconces casting long shadows that flickered and danced across the aged stone, the chill of the evening still lingering in the air despite the warmth of the hearth nearby, her fingers brushing lightly against the fabric of her dress as if to anchor herself in the moment, the scent of burning oak filling her senses with a strange comfort that contrasted sharply with the tension tightening her chest. Harrison moved with deliberate calm, each step measured, his presence commanding yet restrained, the subtle shift in his posture hinting at the faintest acknowledgement of her anxiety. And as they reached the library, the vast room stretched before them, shelves towering with volumes whose leather-bound spines caught the firelight, illuminating dust motes that swirled lazily in the air, a silent witness to countless generations. He gestured for her to sit near the tall window, where the muted light of the winter afternoon fell in soft beams, casting a pale glow across her features, and she obeyed, the weight of her eyes betraying the careful composure she tried to maintain, the tremble in her fingers betraying more than she intended. Harrison remained standing, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made Clara's pulse quicken, the unspoken dialogue between them flowing in glances and measured breaths, a dance of restraint and curiosity. And when he finally spoke, his voice was low, precise, yet carried a subtle warmth that had not been there before. "You may remain here while I attend to some matters," he said, and though his words were formal, the softness underlying them offered a tentative reassurance, a fleeting glimpse into the man behind the austere facade. Clara nodded, her heart beating rapidly, each breath shallow, the enormity of her new life pressing against her, yet within the constriction there was a glimmer of hope, a quiet resolve to navigate this strange world with dignity. And as she gazed out at the snow-laden gardens beyond the window, the wind bending the branches of the ancient oaks, she allowed herself a moment to feel the raw weight of isolation and the fragile spark of connection that had been ignited in the briefest instant of their encounter. Harrison's eyes lingered on her for a heartbeat longer, the briefest flicker of emotion crossing his features, the subtle acknowledgement of the courage and grace he recognized in her. And then he turned, moving toward the rows of bookshelves with measured steps, the echo of his movement leaving Clara alone with her thoughts, the quiet hum of the estate settling around her like a protective shroud. And as the shadows lengthened and the firelight danced across her face, she realized that in the span of a single hour, the walls that had seemed so imposing and cold could conceal not only authority, but also the first delicate threads of understanding and trust, a promise unspoken yet deeply felt, the air between them charged with a tension that held the possibility of connection, a fragile beginning whose full measure neither could yet see, but which stirred a cautious hope that something more profound might emerge from the silence of the estate and the frozen world outside. Leaving Clara poised on the threshold of discovery and anticipation, her gaze drawn repeatedly to the retreating figure of Harrison, and the room seemed to hold its breath with her, the story unfolding in the quiet spaces between heartbeats and the flicker of candlelight, each moment a testament to the fragile and uncharted journey that lay ahead. The evening deepened within the grand walls of the estate, shadows stretching long across the polished marble floors as Clara Bennett moved carefully through the corridor, the soft rustle of her skirts the only sound echoing through the otherwise silent halls, each step measured, each breath caught in anticipation of what lay ahead. Harrison Blackwood's study door loomed ahead, its dark oak surface imposing, yet as she approached, the faint glow of candlelight spilling through the cracks revealed a warmth that contrasted with the chill of the storm outside, the air carrying the subtle scent of old parchment and burning wood, grounding her in the gravity of the moment and yet inviting a quiet curiosity. The Duke stood near his desk, his posture as composed and controlled as ever, but the slight relaxation in his shoulders betrayed the attention he had given to her movements. The intensity of his gray eyes softened by the subtle acknowledgement of her courage in navigating these unfamiliar surroundings, and Clara felt a flutter of both trepidation and fascination as she lifted her gaze to meet his, their unspoken dialogue a tapestry woven from glances, pauses, and the gentle cadence of measured breaths. He gestured toward a chair near the fireplace, the flickering light casting delicate shadows on the ornate rugs and tapestries, and Clara obeyed, settling into the seat with a quiet dignity, hands clasped in her lap, every muscle tense yet restrained, the warmth from the hearth brushing her cheeks and lending a fragile sense of comfort amidst the uncertainty. Harrison remained standing, yet his proximity altered the energy in the room, the quiet hum of the storm outside contrasting with the charged stillness between them, each movement deliberate, each word unspoken weighted with possibility, the silence stretching like a taut thread ready to snap. And in that suspended moment, Clara became acutely aware of the subtleties of his presence, the unyielding calm, the controlled breathing, the faint twitch of an eyebrow, all signs of an emotion he had not yet revealed, but which hovered just beneath the surface, bridging the distance between duty and something more profound. The crackle of the fire punctuated the tension, shadows flickering across their faces as Harrison finally spoke, his voice measured, low, and steady. "It is a long evening ahead. You may find solace here, while I attend to matters of the estate." And though the words were formal, the gentle inflection carried a reassurance that Clara clung to, a fragile tether grounding her in a world of uncertainty. She nodded, fingers tightening briefly on her lap before releasing, drawing a deep breath to steady her racing heart, allowing her eyes to wander over the room, noticing the intricate carvings, the worn leather-bound books, the way the candlelight shimmered across the polished surfaces, and in that quiet observation, she felt a tentative connection, a subtle acknowledgement that while the estate and its master were formidable, they were not unapproachable, that within the rigid structure lay spaces for understanding, for tentative trust, for the beginning of something unspoken yet palpable. And as she settled further into the chair, the storm's howl outside a distant echo, Clara sensed the first stirrings of a fragile bond, delicate yet undeniable, waiting to unfold with each shared glance, each measured gesture, each heartbeat bridging the distance between formality and the whisper of something far more intimate and profound. Clara sat near the tall window, watching the snow drift lazily against the frost-covered panes, each flake catching the dim light like a tiny star, and she drew a slow breath, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease slightly as the quiet of the room settled around her, the scent of polished wood and flickering candlelight wrapping her in a fragile comfort. Harrison approached, his steps soft yet deliberate across the marble floor, the subtle rhythm of his movements punctuating the silence. And when he paused beside her, the flicker of the firelight glinting in his steel-gray eyes caught her attention, revealing a glimpse of the emotion beneath his composed exterior, a flicker of concern, of something that she could not yet name, and Clara felt a curious mix of apprehension and reassurance stir in her chest. He gestured toward a small table where a cup of warm tea had been placed, and she reached for it, the warmth seeping into her fingers as her gaze met his, the unspoken communication between them deepening with every measured glance, the weight of their shared solitude pressing them together in the quiet of the room, yet maintaining the careful space that decorum demanded. Harrison's voice broke the stillness, low and precise. "The storm will not relent tonight. You will find safety here, away from the roads." And though the words were formal, the softness underlying them was unmistakable, a subtle invitation to trust, to find a small sanctuary within the vastness of the estate. And Clara nodded, fingers clasping the cup tightly, the heat a small comfort against the chill of uncertainty, her heart pounding with the mixture of fear and cautious hope. As the evening deepened, the room seemed to contract around them, the shadows from the dancing flames elongating across the rugs and tapestries, and Clara found herself observing Harrison more closely, noting the slight relaxation in his posture, the faint shift in his expression as he regarded her with careful attentiveness, a study of contrasts between the commanding presence of the Duke and the quietly attentive man who seemed to measure her very soul with each deliberate glance. A moment passed, heavy and charged, the storm outside a distant roar, and then Harrison took a measured step closer, maintaining the formal distance. Yet the gesture carried a subtle reassurance, a promise of patience, of cautious understanding, and Clara felt a flicker of courage rise within her, a fragile ember of confidence that she allowed to bloom in the quiet of the study, each heartbeat echoing the delicate tension that bound them in this shared space. The beginning of trust forming not with words, but with the unspoken recognition of the strength and vulnerability present in both of them. And, as the night deepened, shadows playing across the walls, the candlelight flickering like tiny sentinels in the dim room, Clara realized that while the estate was imposing and the Duke formidable, there was within this shared silence a tentative space where understanding, connection, and the first hints of an unexpected bond could take root, delicate yet persistent, promising that even within the rigid walls of duty and expectation, there was room for the fragile beginnings of something profound and uncharted between them. The storm outside intensified, snow hammering against the tall windows of Harrison Blackwood's estate. Yet inside the library, the world seemed suspended, the crackle of the fireplace casting dancing shadows across the shelves filled with aged tomes, and Clara Bennett sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, the warmth of the tea radiating through her fingers as her gaze traced the intricate patterns of the rug beneath her feet, her thoughts a whirl of anxiety and cautious hope. Harrison approached again, his tall frame moving with measured steps, the gray of his eyes softening in the glow of the firelight, each step echoing in the cavernous room and marking a rhythm that made Clara acutely aware of the silent space between them, a space charged with the weight of expectation and the faint promise of understanding. He paused near the hearth, his gloved hand resting lightly on the edge of the mantel, and Clara felt the shift in energy, the subtle acknowledgement of her presence, the almost imperceptible easing of the rigid formality that had defined their first hours together. And in that pause, she noticed the smallest flicker of expression in his features, a trace of curiosity, concern, or perhaps the beginning of patience, though his lips remained set, composed, unyielding in form. Clara allowed her eyes to meet his, the room holding its breath with her as she read the nuanced movements, the tilt of his head, the careful positioning of his shoulders, and she felt the first delicate stirrings of connection, a recognition that while he remained a figure of authority and strength, there was within him an openness yet unspoken, a quiet invitation to engage, to speak, to step into the bounds of the estate and the life that awaited. The wind outside whispered against the windows, the sound mingling with the soft pop of the fire, creating a rhythm that underscored the tension and anticipation in the room, and Clara's fingers tightened around her teacup as she drew in a slow, steadying breath, the warmth seeping into her chest, grounding her in the present, even as her mind raced with questions of the future, of her place in this imposing household, and of the man who watched her with such measured intensity. Harrison finally spoke, his voice low, precise, and carrying the smallest undertone of softness. "You may remain here without concern. The estate will provide for your comfort while the evening unfolds." And though the words were formal, the subtle inflection lent them an unspoken reassurance, a fleeting hint that he observed not only her actions but her courage, her composure, and her vulnerability, and that each of these qualities mattered in ways beyond decorum. Clara nodded silently, setting down the cup, the steam rising to mingle with the shadows cast by the flickering flames, and in that quiet act, she felt the beginnings of a fragile trust, a connection formed not by declarations but by the shared understanding of their circumstance, the silent acknowledgement of one another's presence and the delicate tension that wove them together in the dimly lit room, leaving both aware that the hours ahead would shape a bond neither had yet fully imagined, yet already hinted at possibilities that extended beyond obligation and into something profoundly human and unexpectedly tender, a promise hovering in the spaces between heartbeats and the flicker of candlelight. The evening shadows deepened in Harrison Blackwood's estate, the storm outside a relentless roar against the tall windows, yet inside the library, a delicate quiet enveloped Clara Bennett as she traced her gaze across the polished wood and towering shelves, the flickering candlelight casting long, wavering shadows that danced across her delicate features, each movement revealing the subtle tremor of anticipation in her fingers, and the soft, rhythmic ticking of a distant clock punctuated the stillness, marking the passage of time in deliberate increments. Harrison approached from across the room, his tall figure moving with measured grace, each step deliberate, echoing faintly against the marble floor, his gray eyes fixed on her with a careful intensity that made Clara acutely aware of the charged space between them, a space filled with unspoken words and the quiet tension of shared solitude, yet tempered by the faint flicker of warmth that had begun to soften the rigid edges of his demeanor. He stopped a few feet away, the distance between them both a boundary and a bridge, and Clara felt her pulse quicken, her breath catching as she measured the subtleties of his posture, the slight incline of his shoulders, the faint relaxation of his jaw, all telling of an attention that went beyond mere formality, a focus that seemed to recognize her courage, her composure, and the vulnerability she held carefully beneath her calm exterior. The wind howled against the windows, snow drifting lazily in the waning light, yet inside, the library seemed suspended in a fragile cocoon of warmth and shadow, and Clara allowed her eyes to meet his, noticing the faintest shift in the steel-gray gaze, a subtle acknowledgement of the momentary connection forming between them, an unspoken understanding that this encounter, though constrained by circumstance and obligation, held the promise of discovery and recognition, of mutual observation that transcended the ordinary boundaries of propriety. Harrison's voice finally broke the silence, low and deliberate, carrying the slightest undertone of curiosity. "The evening is long, yet you need not remain idle. Walk, observe, and acclimate yourself to the estate." And Clara nodded, drawing in a steadying breath, the warmth from the tea still lingering in her hands, a small comfort against the apprehension fluttering in her chest, each heartbeat echoing the tentative steps toward trust and understanding, each exhalation releasing a fragment of tension held too tightly in her shoulders. She rose slowly, glancing around the room, the interplay of light and shadow creating a tableau that seemed to mirror the delicate balance between formality and the first hints of familiarity. And as she moved toward the high windows, Harrison's gaze followed, steady, measured, attentive, the silence between them thick yet laden with possibility, an intricate dance of awareness and anticipation that drew her attention to the nuances of his presence and the subtle consideration in each measured step he took. The storm outside faded into the background, its howling becoming a distant murmur against the walls of stone, and in that quiet, suspended moment, Clara sensed the careful unfolding of an understanding neither had yet named, a delicate tension interwoven with respect and curiosity, and as the candlelight flickered across her face, she realized that the space they shared in the vast, shadowed library held not just the weight of obligation, but the first fragile threads of a bond forming, tender, cautious, yet undeniable. poised on the cusp of something profoundly human, waiting to be tested, nurtured, and ultimately understood as the night stretched on before them. Clara's footsteps echoed softly along the wide corridor as she followed Harrison through the shadowed hallways of the estate, the flickering candlelight casting elongated shapes across the polished marble, and each step seemed to carry the weight of unspoken anticipation, the quiet tension of the night pressing against the walls around them as the storm outside continued to batter the tall windows with gusts of icy wind. Harrison moved with deliberate precision, his presence commanding yet measured, the gray of his eyes catching the flicker of light from the sconces. And as he paused near a tall arched window overlooking the snow-laden gardens, Clara felt the subtle shift in the air, a charge of awareness threading between them, the space vibrating with the quiet acknowledgement of the emotions neither dared to name. He gestured toward the view, and Clara's gaze followed, taking in the frozen branches, the way the moonlight glimmered on the icy surface of the fountains, the vast quiet of the grounds seeming to mirror the fragile stillness of the moment. And as she inhaled, the crisp air bringing a shiver, she felt the delicate balance between apprehension and curiosity within her, the pulse in her veins echoing the unsteady rhythm of anticipation that Harrison's proximity inspired. He spoke softly, measured, yet with a subtle warmth. The gardens looked different in the moonlight, and Clara turned to meet his gaze, the gray eyes observing her with a careful attention that made her heart flutter, a blend of recognition and curiosity, the unspoken dialogue flowing in glances and pauses, each one weighted with restraint and the faintest trace of connection. The firelight from the library behind them cast gentle shadows across the walls, illuminating the carved wood and tapestries with a subtle golden glow, and Clara noticed the almost imperceptible softening of Harrison's posture, the quiet acknowledgement of her courage in stepping into this unknown world, the tentative patience that allowed for her to find her footing within the imposing halls. And as she adjusted the folds of her skirt, she felt the first hint of ease, a fragile thread of trust weaving between them, delicate yet undeniable. The wind outside roared like a distant chorus, yet the space around them seemed insulated, a private world of observation and subtle understanding, each glance carrying more weight than words could convey, each measured breath a dialogue of anticipation. And Clara sensed the careful dance of proximity and restraint, the tension neither needing to be broken nor spoken aloud, for the presence itself communicated more than any utterance could. Harrison moved a small step closer, maintaining a respectful distance, the unspoken promise in his gaze drawing Clara's attention, compelling her to acknowledge the complexity of the bond forming in the shadowed corridor, and in that suspended, candlelit space. She realized that the night had become a canvas for observation, reflection, and the first threads of understanding, a bridge between two lives that had collided under circumstances neither had chosen, yet both were learning to navigate, leaving the unspoken potential for a deeper connection shimmering like the moonlight upon the snow, a quiet promise waiting to unfold in the hours yet to come. The night deepened within the walls of Harrison Blackwood's estate, the storm outside a relentless chorus against the tall windows, yet inside the corridors and chambers, the firelight cast a soft, golden glow, illuminating the intricate carvings and the towering bookshelves that lined the library, and Clara Bennett moved with careful steps, her gown brushing lightly against the polished marble, each sound echoing faintly, marking her presence in the vast, shadowed space, the weight of uncertainty pressing upon her chest even as a fragile curiosity guided her movements. Harrison followed at a measured distance, his presence a quiet command, the steel-gray eyes observing her with deliberate attention, noting every subtle gesture, the gentle tilt of her head, the way her fingers clutched at the folds of her dress, each motion a testament to her composure and the courage she carried within. And in that silent observation, Clara felt the faintest stirring of reassurance, the smallest acknowledgement of her strength and vulnerability alike. They reached a high, arched window overlooking the snow-covered gardens, the moonlight spilling across the frozen fountains and twisted branches of the oaks, casting a silver glow that made the frost sparkle like scattered crystals. And Clara's breath caught as she took in the serene beauty of the estate in the storm's quiet interlude. the wind outside whispering through the trees, a muted symphony to accompany the delicate tension of the moment. Harrison stepped closer, careful to maintain respectful distance, and Clara's eyes met his, the unspoken dialogue between them thick with anticipation, curiosity, and the beginnings of understanding, each measuring the other's emotions without a word, each heartbeat a quiet drum marking the fragile rhythm of their connection. The firelight flickering across their features, highlighting the subtleties of expression, the softening of a frown, the narrowing of eyes in concentration or interest, the faintest lift at the corner of lips that spoke more than formal politeness ever could. He gestured toward the distant gardens, and Clara followed his gaze, noting the way the moonlight reflected on the icy paths, the frozen fountains, the delicate lattice of frost on the windows, and she realized in that instant how the quiet observation and attention he gave her created a space where she could both breathe and exist fully, without pretense, without expectation, a fragile sanctuary within the imposing walls of the estate. Harrison's voice broke the silence, low and steady. "Walk with me," he said, the command softened by a subtle warmth, and Clara moved with him through the corridor, the echoes of their footsteps harmonizing with the crackle of the fire and the muted howl of the wind outside. Each step measured, deliberate, each one a rhythm of cautious trust, the tension between them taut yet unspoken, a delicate dance of presence and acknowledgement. And as they paused to observe the distant moonlit grounds together, Clara felt the faintest glimmer of connection, a delicate thread weaving between them, fragile yet undeniable, the first unspoken promise of understanding and perhaps, in time, something deeper, quietly waiting to unfold as the storm raged beyond the windows and the night held its breath with them both. The moonlight spilled across the frozen gardens, casting delicate silver patterns on the snow as Clara Bennett followed Harrison Blackwood through the wide corridor, the echo of their footsteps blending with the faint howl of the storm outside. Each step a careful negotiation of presence and distance, the air between them charged with the quiet tension of anticipation and the subtle acknowledgement of mutual awareness. Harrison's eyes, ever watchful and precise, softened for the briefest instant. As he noted Clara's thoughtful pause before a tall window, the curve of her shoulders and the gentle tilt of her head reflecting both curiosity and hesitation. And in that moment, Clara felt the first hint of recognition that the Duke's attention carried more than mere formality, a quiet observance that held both understanding and unspoken consideration. The firelight flickered along the walls, casting moving shadows across the ornate rugs and towering bookshelves, illuminating the delicate features of Clara's face, the warmth of the hearth providing a gentle contrast to the chill that lingered in the air from the storm. And she took a measured breath, feeling the tension in her chest ease slightly as the weight of the day and the pressure of expectation began to shift toward a cautious equilibrium. Harrison moved closer, still maintaining a respectful distance, the measured rhythm of his steps a silent marker of intent. And as he paused beside her, his gray eyes met hers with a subtle intensity, a quiet probing for her reaction and the first tentative acknowledgement of the emotions she carefully concealed beneath composure and grace. Clara's gaze flicked to the flickering fire, then back to the Duke, noting the smallest shifts in expression, the almost imperceptible softening of his features, the brief catch of his breath, and she felt a ripple of cautious hope, the faintest thread of trust forming between them. Delicate yet undeniable, a fragile bridge across the formalities that had governed their interactions since her arrival. The storm outside continued to batter the windows, the wind moaning through the branches of the ancient oaks. Yet inside, the space between them seemed insulated, a quiet sanctuary where the first unspoken intimacies of awareness could be acknowledged, each gesture, glance, and subtle movement creating a dialogue that required no words, a delicate conversation of presence and perception that deepened with every heartbeat. Harrison finally spoke, his voice low and deliberate, carrying a subtle warmth beneath the formal tone. "The night is long, and you are safe here." And Clara nodded, drawing a slow, steady breath, feeling the small comfort of his acknowledgement, the unspoken promise of patience and careful attention wrapping around her like a protective shroud. As she followed him to a nearby seating area, the firelight playing across the polished surfaces and casting dancing shadows on the tall bookshelves. She sensed the gradual unraveling of the distance that had defined their first hours together, the rigid formality giving way to a delicate, tentative awareness of each other's presence, the quiet beginnings of trust and understanding taking root in the soft light and the lingering warmth, a fragile but undeniable connection poised to grow as the night unfolded and the storm outside whispered against the stone walls of the estate, leaving both aware that this moment marked the first step into a journey neither could yet fully foresee, but which promised a subtle, profound, and enduring resonance between them. The soft glow of candlelight illuminated the library as Clara Bennett settled into the armchair near the hearth, the warmth seeping through her fingers as she clasped the teacup, her eyes tracing the flickering shadows dancing across the high shelves filled with leather-bound volumes, each spine reflecting the golden light in a subtle shimmer. Harrison Blackwood stood near the grand desk, his posture composed yet subtly softened, the gray of his eyes fixed on her with a careful attention that seemed to weigh every detail, the delicate tilt of her head, the gentle folding of her hands, the faintest tremor in her composure, all observed with measured consideration that spoke of a mind attuned not only to the present but to the nuanced expressions of emotion she carefully held in reserve. The storm outside had softened to a gentle whisper against the tall windows, snow drifting slowly in the pale moonlight, casting a silvery glow across the frozen gardens visible beyond, and Clara allowed herself a moment to breathe, the weight of the day easing slightly in the quiet of the room, the firelight blending with the muted luminescence of the night to create an atmosphere both intimate and expansive, where each detail seemed amplified in significance. Harrison's steps echoed faintly as he moved closer, maintaining a respectful distance, his presence both commanding and deliberate, and when he paused, the subtle shift in his expression suggested a rare curiosity, a consideration of her reactions, the delicate manner in which she navigated the space between formality and the tentative beginnings of trust. Clara lifted her gaze to meet his, noting the softening of his features in the firelight, the flicker of something unreadable in his gray eyes, the faintest acknowledgement that her courage and grace were seen and noted, a silent affirmation of her worth within the imposing walls of the estate, the quiet hum of the storm outside, the occasional crackle of the fireplace, and the gentle rhythm of their mutual observation created a suspended tension, each heartbeat measured, each breath drawn with careful awareness, the unspoken dialogue between them unfolding in glances, gestures, and the minute shifts of posture, all laden with the potential for understanding and the nascent threads of connection. Harrison's voice finally broke the silence, low and deliberate, carrying the subtle warmth of consideration beneath the formal tone. "You may remain here without concern. The evening is yours." And Clara nodded, feeling the gravity and reassurance of the statement, her pulse quickening slightly at the acknowledgement. The careful attention he gave her fostering a fragile sense of comfort, a tentative bond taking root in the quiet observation and shared presence. She shifted slightly in her chair, noticing the subtle interplay of light and shadow, the way the fire illuminated the texture of the books, the polished surfaces, the carved details of the furniture, and, in that moment, she realized that the space between them, though constrained by formality and circumstance, held a delicate promise, a quiet opening where trust could be nurtured and understanding could grow, each glance a bridge, each subtle movement a wordless conversation, the beginning of a connection that was both fragile and undeniable, quietly shaping the unfolding story within the stately, shadowed walls of the estate, leaving the night suspended in anticipation, the air thick with possibility and the unspoken potential of what might come next. The firelight flickered across the library walls, casting warm, wavering shadows over the rows of leather-bound books as Clara Bennett rose from her chair, her fingers brushing lightly against the polished wood of the desk for balance, each step measured, deliberate, the soft rustle of her gown blending with the quiet hum of the storm outside. Harrison Blackwood followed a pace behind her, his tall, commanding frame moving with deliberate precision, the steel-gray eyes fixed on her with careful observation, noting the subtle shifts in her posture, the slight catch of breath, the delicate movements of her hands, all details that spoke of composure layered over underlying tension. And in that silent attentiveness, Clara sensed the unspoken recognition of her courage and patience, a quiet acknowledgement that lent her a fragile sense of ease amidst the unfamiliar surroundings. They moved toward a window that framed the snow-dusted gardens beyond, moonlight spilling across the frozen fountains and leafless branches, and Clara inhaled deeply, the crisp air carrying a mixture of frost and distant pine, each breath a grounding force as she took in the serene beauty of the estate under the pale glow, while the warmth from the hearth behind her softened the chill creeping into her fingers. Harrison paused beside her, maintaining the formal distance yet radiating a presence that was both protective and attentive, the subtle curve of his jaw, the faint easing of tension in his shoulders, and the quiet focus of his gaze revealing an awareness that extended beyond mere observation, a silent dialogue of trust and consideration beginning to form between them. Clara's eyes met his, noting the delicate shift in expression, the shadowed flicker of curiosity and concern in the gray depths, and she felt a tentative warmth in the acknowledgement, a thread of connection weaving through the careful boundaries imposed by circumstance and etiquette, each moment charged with the potential of understanding and cautious intimacy, neither needing words to communicate the subtle emotions that rippled between them. The storm outside continued its whispered cadence against the stone walls, yet inside, the library held a suspended calm, the interplay of candlelight, firelight, and moonlight creating a tapestry of illumination that highlighted their forms and gestures, each subtle movement a conversation of presence, of attention, of consideration, each heartbeat a marker of the fragile progression of trust and awareness. Harrison's voice finally broke the silence, low, measured, and carrying a tone of gentle authority. The estate is quiet tonight, but there is much to observe and understand. Walk, and take note of your surroundings. And Clara nodded, her chest rising and falling with a mixture of nervous anticipation and careful composure. Following his guidance through the dimly lit corridors, her steps echoing softly, the polished marble amplifying each footfall as they moved past towering portraits and carved archways, the quiet rhythm of movement creating a shared awareness of space, proximity, and intention. As they paused near a high-arched window, the flickering candlelight reflecting in Harrison's eyes, Clara felt the delicate tension between them, a mixture of formality, curiosity, and the nascent stirrings of trust, each glance and subtle gesture deepening the silent dialogue, the quiet understanding of one another growing in the hushed library, leaving them suspended in the anticipation of what might come, the night stretching ahead, rich with potential, unspoken, and profoundly present in the spaces between breath, shadow, and the faint warmth of shared presence. The library had grown quiet, the storm outside softened to a gentle whisper, snow drifting lazily across the expansive gardens and shimmering beneath the pale moonlight, and Clara Bennett stood near the tall arched window, her fingers brushing against the smooth surface of the sill as she inhaled the crisp, fragrant air, the warmth from the hearth and the flickering candlelight creating a cocoon of gentle illumination around her. Harrison Blackwood moved to stand beside her, his presence commanding yet careful, the steel-gray eyes catching the soft glow of the fire, reflecting both the formal authority he carried and the subtle, unspoken acknowledgement of the courage and grace she had displayed throughout the evening, the faintest ease in his posture revealing the careful consideration he gave to each gesture, each glance, as they shared the quiet space together. Clara's gaze lifted to meet his, the tension and anticipation woven into the moments between them, each breath measured, each heartbeat marking the delicate rhythm of understanding, a silent conversation carried through subtle shifts in expression, the tilt of the head, the soft narrowing of the eyes, and the gentle arch of brows, all conveying more than words could ever capture, a dialogue of presence and attention that deepened with every shared second. The storm outside played a distant symphony against the stone walls, yet within the library, the world seemed suspended, a space carved from quiet, flickering light, and the subtle interplay of shadows from the tall shelves and gilded frames lent a cinematic quality to their shared moment, highlighting the fragile but undeniable connection slowly weaving between them. A tapestry of trust, awareness, and tentative understanding. Harrison's voice broke the silence, low, deliberate, and carrying the faintest warmth beneath the formal tone. The night is long, yet the estate holds nothing to fear. You are safe. And Clara's chest rose and fell with a measured breath, the words resonating in her, grounding her in the shared presence and the careful recognition he offered, a reassurance that gave her courage and a quiet sense of belonging within the imposing walls. She shifted slightly, the firelight tracing the delicate curves of her features, and Harrison's eyes followed, noting each subtle movement, the slight inhale, the careful placement of her hands, the controlled adjustment of her gown, each a testament to her poise and inner strength. And in the silent observation, a dialogue unfolded, built from attention, awareness, and mutual acknowledgement of the nuances of emotion and restraint, a delicate rhythm that neither could yet fully articulate, but both felt deeply. As Clara turned to observe the gardens, the moonlight casting silver patterns on the snow, she sensed the careful balance of distance and attention, the formal boundaries softened by the shared understanding, each glance between them laden with unspoken recognition, each pause carrying the weight of potential, and the subtle warmth of Harrison's presence offered both reassurance and intrigue, a delicate bridge between propriety and the first stirrings of deeper connection, leaving the night suspended in anticipation. The soft murmur of the storm and the flicker of candlelight marking the quiet promise of a bond, fragile yet profound, poised to unfold in the hours and days that lay ahead within the estate's shadowed and luminous halls.